All right. Good morning, boys and girls. We are on to chapter 7 in Shooting the Moon, where we left off last. Jamie, the main character, went over to her neighbor, Cindy, and she went to show the photographs that her brother took in Vietnam. And she went over there because her brother was in Vietnam too. So she thought they'd have something in common. But I don't think she was as interested in the photos as much as Jamie. So let's see how this photo thing goes back and forth. Okay. TJ's next so called letter came 2 weeks later. I ripped open the padded envelope, hoping this time there'd be a note with some real news in it. Some good old fashioned descriptions of rifle reports, or a hand grenade rolling across a jungle path. Something that would give me a real feel for what it was like to be TJ right then. It might be tough for me to actually get a job as an ambulance driver in Vietnam, but if TJ would just write me a real letter, it would be like I was in Vietnam, right beside him. But all that envelope contained was two more rolls of film in their little black containers with their little gray caps. His letter to my parents was as boring as the one had been before. The food was bad, the nurses were nice, a couple of them were even pretty. He'd been riding some of he'd been riding in the medevac helicopter, which was the helicopter that went to pick up wounded soldiers. That last part had the potential to be interesting, only TJ didn't describe an actual time when he'd ridden the helicopter out to a battle scene. My seventh grade English teacher, Mrs. Robertson, would have deducted 10 points for a lack of specific detail. Because I was a natural in the darkroom, I decided to try developing the film alone, without Sergeant Byrd there to guide me through every step. I felt nervous about it, but I reasoned that I couldn't depend on Sergeant Byrd to be there to help me the entire time TJ was in Vietnam, and I didn't make a single mistake. If you don't count dropping the film spool lid in the dark closet and having to get down on my hands and knees and find it, and then dropping the second roll of film in the dark it even unspooled it before I'd unspooled it and had to scramble around for 20 minutes before I found it by kneeling on it. Other than that, it was fine. But I didn't expose the film, and that was all that counted. When I finished getting in on the spool and the canister had got the lid on tight, I mixed the developer and poured it onto the canister. I poured it out of the developer after 10 minutes, poured it in the vinegar smelling stop solution. After that came the fixer. Then I rinsed off all the chemicals, pulled out all the negatives, and hung them out to dry from the clothesline strung across the room, and went out to talk to Private Hollister. I wish TJ would write me a real letter, I told him after we'd sat down across from each other at his desk and he began to deal the cards for a game of gin. I don't even know if he got the pictures I developed for him. When did you send them? About a week ago. He ain't got the package yet, that's for sure. Or he's just getting it right about now. Well, you'd think he'd want to see how I did on the first roll of film before he'd sent me any more. I leaned back in my chair, thinking about how badly I wanted to hear what TJ had to say about his job I did with his film. He'd only asked for contact sheets where each negative was printed in a miniature, so you could see all your pictures from a roll of film on one sheet of paper. I'd done a sheet for him, but I'd also done prints of each photograph. Private Hollister picked up a card from the top of the deck. Your pictures look pretty good to me, or TJ's pictures, I guess I should say. I bet he'll like 'em a lot. Did your folks like 'em? Yeah, I guess. I mean, my mom's hung two of them on the fridge, so I guess she liked 'em. This new batch looks pretty interesting from what I can tell, I said, discarding and picking up a card from the deck. It's hard to tell exactly what you're looking at when you're looking at a negative. Definitely people, but I think there might be some helicopters this time. We played 5 hands of gin, with Private Hollister coming out on top, 3 hands to 2. I guess I'll go print those pictures now, I said, The negatives ought to be dry. I hope there's some good stuff, like maybe a combat picture or something. Maybe some North Vietnamese prisoners of war. Sergeant taught me some Vietnam talk when we worked on the last roll of film. Like an ambulance is called a cracker box, and you call the enemy Charlie or Mr. Charles. You know, Jamie, there's something. Private Art Hollister stopped, coughed. There's just this one thing you want to. He stopped again. Forget it. It ain't important. Are you sure? I asked him, itching to get to that film. Private Hollister nodded. Nothing that can't wait till later. I made contact sheets of both rolls of film. Last time I printed all the pictures, but this time I decided I wanted to be more picky. Once I developed the contact sheets, I sat down on a table in the dark room with a magnifying glass to go over each picture and see the ones worth taking the time to print. As I thought, there were plenty of pictures to print. Lots of soldiers holding beer cans and sleeping or lying on cots reading magazines. There was a trio of pretty nurses and the dog he'd taken a picture of before showed up again. This time with a bandana tied around his neck. I was starting to get bored. Since I didn't know any of the people, their pictures didn't really mean anything to me. But there was an image that caught my eye. 3 medics were carrying a wounded GI on a stretcher from a helicopter. In the foreground was another soldier, only he was looking away from the helicopter, like he didn't want to see what was going on all around him. The wounded soldier had bandages wrapped around his chest, and there was blood seeping through them. That was the picture I wanted to print. It's a funny thing printing a photograph because when you're in the process of doing it, you're paying attention to the tiniest things, like the fingers on a hand, trying to get them to show up in sharp detail, or bringing out the shadow falling across someone's face. Each little piece of the picture is a little part of a puzzle, and the more defined you make everything, the more your picture tells a story. For some reason, I got all involved in bringing out the details in the soldier's face, the one who was looking away. He probably headed back to get someone else. But the way the camera caught him, it seemed like he couldn't bear to look at the man the medics were carrying out of the helicopter. Maybe because he was the only face I could really see. I kept wanting to look at it, kept wondering, what was he thinking about? And then my eyes drifted up to the wounded soldier. There was a lot of blood coming through the bandages wrapped around his chest. Did DJ know whether or not he made it to the hospital alive? Was he alive now, back in the States or back in a combat zone? I spent an hour printing the pictures, trying it again and again until I felt I had it right. I brought it out to show Private Hollister. Isn't this amazing? I asked him, feeling excited about the work I'd done. I mean, it's a picture of somebody who's actually been hit by the enemy. It's the real war. Yeah, it's real, all right, Private Hollister looked awkward, like he didn't quite know what to say to me. I mean, it's definitely a real war. Don't know of it if I want to see pictures of people who are getting killed over there, though. I got to tell you, I've seen enough of that on TV, I guess. Heard enough about it on a day-to-day basis over the last 2 years. Did you ever know anyone who was killed over there? Private Hollister was quiet for a minute. I wondered if he was going through a list of buddies, trying to remember if everybody was still accounted for. He cleared his throat and said, "Yeah, well, my brother Barney did, right at the beginning, back in '65. Hardly anybody knew there was a war then. Not like the way it is now, with protests and hippies and everything." Your brother died? For some reason, I found this answer nearly unacceptable. Private Hollister wasn't the sort of person who had a dead brother. He was the least bit tragic. Did you cry? He laughed and looked up in the air like he didn't know how to answer that question, and he was hoping the ceiling would have made some advice for him. I don't know why I asked that, I said quickly. It's just if TJ died in Vietnam, I'd cry, but I'm a girl. Oh, well, my mom cried, Private Hollister said, sounding more comfortable all of a sudden, like the topic of girls crying was a lot easier for him than for him to handle. Man, she cried a whole river. The doctors finally had to give her some pills. My mom had these pills the doctor gave her for bad headaches. She takes one that she sleeps for 24 hours straight. Huh, Private Hollister said, like I had just told him something very interesting and worthwhile. Right about then, we ran out of conversation. I put the picture down on Private Hollister's desk, picked it up again. Well, I guess I'll go clean it up in the back. I'll do some more printing tomorrow. After work, that is. Don't forget, I'm here tomorrow. I'm here to work. You're here to play cards is more like it, Private Hollister grinned. That too, I agreed. Then I walked back to the dark room to clean up the mess I had made. I pinned the picture of the soldier back on the line and leaned over to pick up some scraps of cut negatives off the floor. As I tossed them into the trash can, a shiver zipped down my arms to the tips of my fingers. The way it did whenever I was lying in bed in the dark and get convinced there was a ghost watching me from the corner of the room. But when I looked around the darkness, all I saw was the picture of the soldier on the stretcher, his face peering down at me from the clothesline. Later, when I looked at the picture again, I stared for a long time at the soldier, imagining what it would be it would I would do imagining what I would do differently if I decided to print it again. I wished I could see the soldier's face. I thought about the fact that he might have been somebody's brother, somebody who was waiting for him to come home. I knew that was one picture I wasn't going to show my mom. All right, things are heating up. She's starting to kind of see what the war's like over there with a couple pictures. All right, we're on to chapter 8, and I would say we're close to halfway. All right, till next time. Have a good day.